Wide receiver is so busted. I just moved up guys from like wide receiver 40 to wide receiver 15 and wide receivers down from like 12 to 30. Like it is so tough making these every week. Starting off with the S tier, one thing can stay the same. JSN, Puka Nacua, Jamar Chase. You pick your poison. You go in whatever direction you want. Schedules going to the future, I'm not even really too concerned about with these three players. Now, going over to our A tier, I'm going to have Rashee Rice leading us off. Rashee Rice this season has scored 23, 25, 18, 10, 24, and 29 fantasy points. He has played 6 games, and 5 of them, he has been a top 12 wide receiver on the week. So, incredibly high floor ceiling combo that you get every week. Matchup this week was going to be tough against the Houston Texans. Week 17, you get the Denver Broncos. But with a player like Rashee Rice, I'm not too concerned. George Pickens, CeeDee Lamb will be our next 2 wide receivers. I know a lot of people are going to want to give their take on who the true wide receiver 1 is. George Pickens has definitely been that guy so far this season. CeeDee Lamb was obviously better this past week. Now, I'm going to say with this again that it honestly doesn't matter. They're in the same tier. What's hilarious, though, is just pointing out that you have 2 Dallas Cowboys wide receivers inside the top 6 of our rankings. I don't know if we've ever ranked 2 wide receivers from the same offense this high together. Like last year, you had Jamar Chase wide receiver 1, and then you had like T. Higgins wide receiver 12. But I can't remember the last time you had 2 wide receivers in the top 6. It may have been like the Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Jameis Winston year. Now, going over to B tier, Davante Adams is just a lock to score a touchdown in every single game. Last time Davante Adams didn't score a touchdown in a game was week 6. This dude's sitting with 14 touchdowns so far this season, and we've only played, 12 games? So, you just jam him in. Target volume's not even there, really. It's just once they get to the goal line, they're forcing it his way. Nico Collins is the wide receiver 1 for my fantasy team. And honestly, I felt really good about him, to be honest. Like we go through and we look at the last 6 games he's played. He's had at least 10 targets in 5 of them. Over the past 5 games he's played, he's had at least 14.5 fantasy points in 4 of them. So I feel really good. The target volume's been pretty consistent as well. 25% team target share. The hope that I would have is CJ Stroud gets a little bit better. Then our next wide receiver is going to be Drake London. London's higher in our rankings this week than he was last week. Much higher than he was 2 weeks ago, but that's because every week you get closer to your return, you will slide up our ranks. I think there's a real shot that he is back in week 14, and we'll see. But if not, of course, we can move him down a tier. And then looking at Chris Olave as our wide receiver 10, Olave gives you an incredible floor, dealing with the back injury that will be something to monitor. I know Devon Valet had a big game this past week, but Olave is sitting here averaging 29% of this team's target share. At the same time, I mean, the man's averaging 9.5 targets per game. So if you have Olave, you just jam him in regardless. Now, here is where we get to the point of the video where I'm going to be 100% honest with you and say, I no longer know what I'm talking about and no longer know what I am doing. Let's just get that out there. AJ Brown, we are flying up these rankings. We had AJ Brown as a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 just 2 weeks ago. But now that the Philadelphia Eagles simply cannot run the ball, and they are having to ask Jalen Hurts to drop back and pass, A.J. Brown back-to-back weeks as a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy, 3 straight games with at least 10 targets. It does look like A.J. Brown's now going back to the wide receiver that he was coming into the season for a lot of people as a set it and forget it low-end wide receiver 1. Like he's now averaging 14.7 points per game, which is higher than any other wide receiver we'll talk about in this tier right now. I mean, T. Higgins is going to be our next name. This is another player flying up these rankings comparison to where we had him last week. But that's because now, all of a sudden, Joe Burrow is your quarterback again. We go back to last season where T. Higgins averaged 18.5 points per game and finishes the wide receiver 6 when you had Joe Burrow under center. So I feel more confident about this Cincinnati Bengals offense. Obviously, the defense is still crap. They're still going to have to go out there and throw the ball in the second half. Now, I know somebody in the comment section is going to go, oh, but they were good against Lamar this past week. Look at what happened this week. Yeah, it was 1 week. Now, here, I'm an idiot, right? So I'm just going to rank Justin Jefferson here. It is tough for me to go through and rank Justin Jefferson lower than a high-end wide receiver 2. Now, realistically, Justin Jefferson hasn't scored more than 11 fantasy points since week 9. Justin Jefferson has 2.4, 8.8, 11.1, and 7.7 fantasy points over the past 4 weeks. But like, if I had Tedero McMillan, honestly, no. I would rather have Tedero McMillan over Jefferson rest of the season. I'll move Ted ahead of him. Because while Bryce Young, I'm not a massive believer in. Now, Bryce Young's a hell of a lot better than whatever they're putting out there in Minnesota. Then Jameson Williams is also a wide receiver that is just flying up these rankings for us. Because if we are looking at JMO, it has been the perfect run out possible. Y'all know I'm not a super big Jameson Williams fan, but you get Amon-Ra St. Brown dealing with a low ankle sprain. St. Brown's probably going to be out about 2 weeks here at the minimum. Now, honestly, I think St. Brown would be at risk to miss even more time if these next few weeks weren't so important for the Lions. But regardless, you have no St. Brown, and at the same time, you have no Laporta. And if you just really contextualize how important this is, hypothetically, you make it to your fantasy football semifinals. You got 3 weeks left. If Amon-Ra St. Brown misses 2 of them, that means Jameson Williams is the only weapon alongside Jahmyr Gibbs in Detroit for like 66% of the remaining of your season. So, JMO, we are going to skyrocket up these. I hope I'm wrong for my best ball teams, but he looks like he's just going to be a must-start name. Egbuka is sliding down. I mean, over the past 7 games for Egbuka, he has 1 game with more than 10 fantasy points. I was excusing it away in week 6, 7, and 8 based off, oh, okay, well, he's dealing with a hamstring injury. He's going to be A-okay. But now that you have Godwin expanding his role and Egbuka's been this bad, it's tough to get behind him. Like Jalen Waddle, we can go ahead and throw out here. Waddle's been really bad as well over the past 2 weeks, but the target volume is just so damn consistent. You've only had 1 game with fewer than 5 targets this season. And then looking at Devonta Smith, with Smith over the past 8 games or so, the target volume has been there as well. Again, the big plays and the big games as of late have gone to A.J. Brown, especially with the receiving touchdowns. Now, moving over to the top of our next tier, another player that is shooting up like 20 spots in these rankings this week is Terry McLaurin. Like, Terry McLaurin had done nothing all season. Terry McLaurin's best game, he had 74 receiving yards against the Raiders in week 3. And now all of a sudden with Marcus Mariota, yes, a lot of it in overtime, but still, McLaurin goes nuclear in a tough matchup against the Denver Broncos in week 13. And now there's a very real shot you get Jaden Daniels back in week 14. So Terry McLaurin goes from unstartable to somebody that I'm very much interested in. Wan'Dale Robinson is going to be our next player here. Tough to rank Wan'Dale right now. We don't know what he does tonight. Just going through and looking at what he's done over the past 6 games, though, he's had at least 9 targets in 5 of the last 6. Obviously getting a lot of volume with the injury to Malik Neighbors. If you're looking at the projections for tonight's game, they have Wan'Dale Robinson on Underdog Fantasy, higher lower 59.5 receiving yards, and they have him higher lower 11.45 fantasy points. Now, obviously, if you want to take advantage of that on Underdog, links in the description, it's in the comment section. Code FLOCK will give you $100 added to your account after you play your first 5. And on top of that, you'll get a Gimme Drake May pick, higher lower half total yard for the Monday night game, and you'll get free questions that you can ask me in the live streams. Now, our next name is going to be Deebo Samuel. I mean, based off the target volume that you actually had from Terry McLaurin in that overtime game against Denver, and the large sample that we have from Terry McLaurin dating back to last season, Maybe I'm overreacting, but honestly, I'm delusional enough to think that Terry McLaurin is the wide receiver one the rest of the way for the Commanders, but we'll see. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown at 22. This ranking is extremely difficult for me to make, right? Like if you are a team that you're fighting for your life to get into the playoffs in week 14, you'd probably value Amon-Ra St. Brown lower than this. But if you were a team like my own, where it's like, hey, I have a bye week in week 15 already, so my week 14 matchup doesn't matter, my week 15 matchup doesn't matter, Amon-Ra St. Brown is a real shot to be back in week 16. And if he's going to be back in week 16 and week 17, he'll be a top 10 wide receiver for those 2 weeks. So very, very dependent on how you'd want to value Amon-Ra St. Brown based off your team situation. Michael Pittman Jr. is sliding down dramatically. We had talked about Pittman being a sell high candidate earlier in the year just because very similar to DK Metcalf. He hadn't had a ton of target volume. He's living off of a bunch of touchdowns, but does seem to be catching up to him somewhat. Like if you're looking at the games in which Pittman has not scored a touchdown this season, he has scored 8, 4, 20.5, 4, and 2 fantasy points. So he's kind of a touchdown or bust wide receiver. And now that Daniel Jones is injured, I think you have to be a little more concerned about the overall offense. Ladd McConkey, I'm going to move Ladd behind Rome Odunze. Rome's been horrible. But with Ladd specifically, if Justin Herbert misses time, he's not startable with Trey Lance. I wish I could say he is, but like Ladd McConkey will be in a super low volume passing attack. Where Rome Odunze, I can't put Rome here. Rome's been horrendous since the bye week. Like since week 4, like after week 4, Rome scored 5, 5, 18, 0. And that was a game in which the Bears scored like 40, 20, 6, 8, and 3 fantasy points. Rome Odunze has been horrendous. So honestly, I'm going to drop these guys an entire tier. Like if we get any positive news about Garrett Wilson, I put Garrett Wilson ahead of him. Obviously, Garrett Wilson, every single week that goes by, goes a little bit higher, and a little bit higher in these rankings as we wait for him to return. They opted to not put him on the IR, which putting on the IR means you're going to miss 4 weeks at the very least. And he just missed his 3rd week. So maybe there's a chance Garrett Wilson makes it back this week. Stephon Diggs, our next guy, difficult to rank Diggs. He had a very strong stretch over the past month when you had no Kayshon Boutte. But as soon as Kayshon Boutte came back into this offense, Stephon Diggs saw his route participation drop dramatically. Then Courtland Sutton comes through. Pretty big game this past week against Washington. But ultimately, it's not like Sutton seeing the same level target share that he had last season. Marvin Harrison, I believe, is the wide receiver one in Arizona. But ultimately, the top option's Trey McBride anyway. And now Marv is dealing with the heel injury. And this is going to be something that's obviously super important to monitor for these ranks. Alec Pierce, projections-wise, is right up there with Michael Pittman Jr. almost every single week with how they project. So if I was a real man and I wasn't afraid of y'all making fun of me in the comment section, I may go ahead and put Alec Pierce right up there back-to-back with Pittman. Zay Flowers is a wide receiver that just scored half a fantasy point in a great matchup against the Bengals this past week. So it doesn't matter if I go, look at the schedule, some pretty good games. He plays Pittsburgh week 14, Cincinnati again, and week 15. Zay Flowers hasn't scored a touchdown since week 1. Lamar Jackson looks like a turd. DK Metcalf is the wide receiver on my team that I'm freaking stuck starting, and I'll let you know, does not feel good. Over the past 5 games, DK Metcalf scored 10 fantasy points in one of them. And now Aaron Rodgers is looking pretty injured. Now, moving down to our next tier, it's crazy to do this, but at this point, I think we got to put Jacoby Myers ahead of Brian Thomas. Jacoby Myers traded for halfway through the season. Brand new to this team. Journeyman wide receiver. How does this happen to a wide receiver like Brian Thomas? Somebody please remind me, when is the last time we saw a wide receiver go round 1 in the NFL draft, then their rookie season, they post a top 10 wide receiver finish in fantasy, and then the next year they're unusable? Brian Thomas is averaging 10 fantasy points a game this year. Troy Franklin will be our next name. Franklin's averaged a ton of targets per game, but the issue is the efficiency hasn't really been great. Jawan Jennings looks like he's probably the wide receiver 1 in San Francisco at the moment, but a lot of this is living off touchdowns. He's had 1 game this year with double-digit targets, and that was back in week 2. Khalil Shakir is a freaking turd. Khalil Shakir, I understand, gave you 100 receiving yards 2 weeks back, but the 2 games that sandwiched that one good performance, he had -3 receiving yards. In this past week, he had 5. No way in hell you ever start him. Quentin Johnston, I don't see how you ever really start if you have the injury to Justin Herbert. Like, y'all know I have an ungodly amount of Quentin Johnston in Underdog best ball drafts, but ultimately, how would I ever tell you to get him in if this offense is not going to throw the ball if Lance is under center? Chris Godwin getting healthier, but at the same time, Godwin still has not shown us a single viable game in fantasy yet. Like, the man's averaging 38 receiving yards a game. This was his first week, though, hitting 10 fantasy points. So definitely trending in the right direction. And then Michael Wilson, this ranking's very much dependent on the health of Marvin Harrison with the heel injury. If it appears that Marv is going to be missing any time, Michael Wilson looks to be a must-start option. If Marv plays, Michael Wilson looks to be a must-bench option. Now, moving down to our next tier. Keenan Allen, I don't necessarily know how we could ever tell you to go out there and put him in, knowing again, 1, he has fallen off to a dramatic degree since the beginning of the season. And 2, at the same time, you're looking at a name that may now have a running back for his quarterback. Romeo Doubs, you can get in and hope that he scores a touchdown, but Christian Watson looks to be the wide receiver 1, while at the same time, Jaden Reed's probably coming back any day now. Xavier Worthy, I'm going to rank him here out of respect. Hook 'em horns, but the dude's averaging 9 points per game this season, not startable. DJ Moore, I mean, the offense is good, but Luther Burden and Colson Loveland are expanding their roles. Jordan Addison is in the worst offense in the league, and he's not even the number 1 option in it. Ricky Pearsall, coming back from his injury, hasn't been usable in a single week. Jaden Higgins is the wide receiver 2 for CJ Stroud. Adonai Mitchell technically is the wide receiver 1 for Tyrod Taylor right now, but if Garrett Wilson comes back this week or next, there goes that. And then Jaden Reed, our last guy here, we'll throw him in out of a sign of respect, but ultimately, I don't know when you would ever start him because I'm definitely not starting him his first week back. I'd kind of want to see 2 weeks of production before we would tell you to get Jaden Reed in your lineup, and 2 weeks from now, the season will be pretty much ending for a lot of us. So I really appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out in some way here. And of course, if you haven't already, hit the like, subscribe to the channel so I can see your cute little face later. And yeah, much love. I'll see you in the live stream later tonight.